Welcome back. Today, we remember a dark day in our country's history, and we reflect on the decades and global changes that have come since September 11th, 2001. My next guest spent 20 years studying how this day is taught in our schools. UW Professor Jeremy Stoddard joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
You and the Dean of Education, that's Diane Hess, you released research last year documenting some of the shortcomings in how we learn about 9/11 in our schools. Why don't you just give me some of those top line findings?
Sure. I think one of the big findings that we've had is that the way many teachers, especially U.S. history teachers, approach teaching about 9/11 really hasn't changed much since a year or two after the attacks actually happened. And so what we find is many teachers are, because they think it's important, teaching about it on the day of the anniversary or right around the anniversary, and largely doing it as sort of a commemorative activity. So possibly showing some of the video or a portion of a film, introducing what the event was, maybe why it's significant. Oftentimes they're telling a personal story if they were teaching at that time or say in college at that time. And so they make it a very commemorative activity that gets across sort of how it's meaningful to them and a significant event. But then they go on to sort of wherever they are in their chronology of the history. So we see them thinking it's important, wanting to teach it on the anniversary, as many schools had programs in those early years after the 9/11 attacks, but then don't really get into the context of it, don't get into the events that led up to 9/11, and don't really teach about the responses afterwards in terms of, a 20-year conflict in Afghanistan and ongoing sort of war on terror.
Which leads me to ask where 9/11's place falls in U.S. or Middle Eastern history, both before and after 9/11. What does that typical education miss in talking about that historic context?
Yeah, so what we find is, especially when you're just teaching about the event sort of individually on the anniversary, is that for many of these students, they don't really know anything about 9/11 or even the conflict that's gone on since, because it hasn't maybe in their lifetime. Now, remember, all of these students were born, years after the attacks at this point. They've only seen sort of a news clip here and there, which is obviously very traumatic and destructive in terms of buildings falling, talking about the death and destruction, the conflict afterwards, and often also very much stereotype sort of Muslims as terrorists. So what we hear from teachers is there's a few challenges in approaching it this way. One is they don't really know anything about the events. And so they're trying to help them understand the context of it, trying to help them understand maybe for those that do take more time, events in Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s, especially where the U.S. was involved, and in moreover, like the U.S. role in Middle East politics. I think the fears that many teachers have and what they're seeing is because they don't know anything about it, many students are going to sort of the internet and they're finding things that lead them to conspiracy theories about 9/11. And so then those are coming into the classroom. Or like when we did the survey in 2018 and 2019, there was a lot of national rhetoric around the ban on Muslim countries, for the most part, traveling to the U.S. And so there was also a rise in Islamophobia and Muslim stereotypes and anti-sort of racist practices trying to be employed in schools around how Muslims were viewed. And so these I think, are some of the risks of not teaching about 9/11. Many young people don't understand what's happened over the past 20 years and how it's impacting them because of the changes that have happened. They don't know how many veterans now are in the U.S. They don't understand some of the issues that both veterans and refugees experience here. Maybe they don't understand fully why Afghan and Iraqi refugees or those that were possibly working with the U.S. military or other allied militaries are being given asylum or being brought to the U.S. as immigrants, and what that means in terms of maybe the U.S. meeting some of its promises it's made.
You mentioned the survey you conducted 2018, 2019 as part of your research. You released some of those findings since then. Is there any reason to think that high school teachers have more teachers have reframed their approach with some of that research being released?
We shared this in part through our survey and in part through some other professional development and providing resources for teachers through a website and some resource sets that we built for them. And these are around really trying to bring in those veterans' perspectives, trying to bring in the perspectives of refugees, trying to bring in the perspectives of Muslim Americans, but doing it in a way that's going to make sense to, again, young people who don't know really anything about 9/11 today. I think there's also ways that they can integrate it across their curriculum, and those were some of the findings that we shared out to teachers to hopefully give them some ideas of how to do that. It's a real challenge because of the structure of the curriculum. On the other hand, I think it's really important for young people to know today why anything as simple as airport security is the way it is, or why when they're seeing in the news people either accepting or protesting, refugees coming, say, from Afghanistan as of last summer, or why legislation about supporting veterans' health issues or mental health issues or homelessness are important, because these are the folks that also, sacrificed portions of their lives going overseas.
Absolutely. Context definitely matters. Professor Stoddard, I really appreciate your insights.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. All right, we will be right back.